been here all along. We will call our meeting to order tonight. Renata, if you could do the roll call, please.
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin,
Aye.
Wood,
Here.
English,
Here.
Miller,
Here.
Evans.
Here.
Let's rise for the invocation. We have Pastor David Bond with Compel Community with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Can we pray together? Heavenly Father, we are just abundantly thankful to be here this evening. Lord, I thank you for each and every individual that I'm standing here, both in my sight and in your sight. Father, I pray that your blessing would be upon them. Father, I thank you for life. I thank you for health. I thank you that we're experiencing it, but I pray for those right now that we know and that are among us that are ailing or not feeling well. Father, our hearts are for them. Father, I thank you for this beautiful city of Coeur d'Alene. I thank you for all the values and this culture and this community that draw so many people here. Father, I pray that those values will be upheld, and I know these are the people to do it. Father, I thank you for our freedoms, Lord, that we get to experience. The freedom of choice, and especially the freedom to choose you. Father, I pray for our nation. The gravity of the situation, Lord, cannot even be understood with words. We're standing on the threshold of, well, we really have no clue what we're standing on the threshold of, but you do. Father, and what I do know that you've put each and every individual in this room, in this place for this time. Father, we know in the scriptures, these are our elected officials, so they've been ordained for a time such as this. These are your people. This is their time. Father, as they go about their business tonight, I pray that you would give them hindsight and foresight. I pray for knowledge and wisdom. I pray that they would lay everything else aside, Lord, that might hinder any decision that would not glorify you. Father, give them wisdom to govern. Give them a sense of the true needs of this community, Father. I pray the only example would be one set forth by you. Father, I pray that you continue to give them a strong desire for justice, rightness, and righteousness. Father, I pray that they would govern in such a way and you would give them confidence that they are doing what is for the greater good of our community. Thank you for these people. Give them a sense of peace. Give them protection and bless them abundantly as they serve our community that we all love so much. It is in your name we pray. Amen. 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 Thank you.
Woody, lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is being recorded.
So we don't have any amendments to tonight's agenda, so we'll move on to public comment. Anyone wishing to give public comment shall have 3 minutes to address the council. I believe we have one gentleman here in the audience that wishes to. But Renata, maybe we'll try to there's a couple people online. Let's see if we can get those couple people online, and then we'll have them give the public comment, and then we'll bring you up.
Okay. It looks like we have 2 people in public comments on Zoom. And if we could have David Lyons proceed, that would be great.
Okay, can you hear me?
Maybe just a little bit louder, David.
Okay, let me try.
Could be on our end, too.
How's that? Is that any better? Is that any better? Can you hear me?
There, that's good.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council bill in agenda item number 1 is not mere housekeeping or clarifying amendments. Sections 3 and 4 of the bill make huge substantive changes, giving the Planning Commission the power to effectively grant a zone change to R34 and eliminating the public's right to get city council review of bad planning commission decisions. Together, they reduce or eliminate not just the public's, but your power over R34 and other controversial development projects and centralize it in the planning commission, the planning department's home field. It's clear that currently the planning commission's only R34 power is to grant a density increase to 34 per acre for property zoned R17, C17, or C17L. And it's clear that's all that was ever intended. The R17, C17, and C17L zoning sections all specifically state that the special use permit granted is for, quote, residential density of the R34 district, unquote. Nothing else. Residential density. That's section 1705.280, .520, and .600. Developers want height. For apartment buildings, the R34 zone allows 63 feet, whereas R17, C17, and C17L allow only 45 feet. To get 63 feet height, the developer needs a zone change to R34, which only the city council can grant. So you have control. But if you approve section 4 of this council bill, you give up that control over R34. The language of the code section 1705-330 is so weak, it doesn't prevent R34 being put next to or in residential neighborhoods. You remember the Miller-Stauffer project on 7th Street, Wallace, the old Social Security building. That was R34 right in the middle of the Garden District. The planning department was fine with that, said it met all the code criteria. The planning commission approved it, but you reversed that planning commission decision on the neighbor's appeal, which brings us to the public's right to get bad planning commission decisions reviewed by you, our elected representatives. The narrow appeal standard the planning department wants would eliminate that. Take River's Edge. Members of the public from all over were concerned about its effect on traffic, schools, height density along the river. They showed up in great numbers and spoke against it at the planning commission. But under the narrow appeal standard the planning department wants, none of those people would have been able to get a bad pro-developer planning commission decision reviewed by you. The planning department had joined with the developer, so they'd never appeal it. And remember that you reversed that planning commission decision and rejected the project twice. Under that narrow appeal standard planning department wants, Lisa Benscheit of the Garden District would not have been able to get you to review the planning commission's decision on the Miller-Stauffer building. But you did, and you reversed the planning commission. You have to retain control and involvement in R34 and other controversial projects and allow the public to do the same, not cede it to the unelected planning department and planning commission. Simply reject sections 3 and 4 of the council bill in agenda item 1. Approve the rest of it if you want, but reject sections 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Renata, do we have someone else out there?
Yes, we have another person out on Zoom raising their hand named John Galt, G-A-L-T. It is your turn.
Go ahead, John. John, are you there?
It appears you're still muted.
John, are you there?
Whatever happened to John Galt?
What do you see there, Renata?
He's there, he has his hand raised, and it looks like he unmuted himself, so he just needs to speak.
John, can you hear us? Well, while we wait on John, gentleman here would like to speak. Come on up.
Thank you.
Just your name for the record would be great.
My name is Stuart Howe, and I'm new to Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint area, and I don't even know what to say. I'm so appreciative of what I've heard and seen since I've been here. I started a new job in Sandpoint early next month, and I have friends here. And this community, from what I've seen, is very special. And I just want to encourage you to stay the course of what I've seen. I know there's pressure to bow to economic interests and social engineering interests of all types. But it's so wonderful to see a community come together and to see the way that this mask issue has been handled. Nobody's forcing anybody to conform, and nobody's forcing anybody to do anything other than do the right thing to the best of their ability and keep safe and keep healthy. And people that want to wear a mask have every right to, and people that don't have every right to, as long as they're not, having symptoms and going to make somebody sick. And I love the sensibility and the kindness that I've seen here, expressed in a lot of different ways. The opening of this meeting, the way that the pastor delivered that remark was very touching. And I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school and hadn't said it in 30 years. And I've said it twice at 2 meetings since I've been here in a week. And it brought a little tear to my eye, because I can tell you people mean it. It's not idle words. And I love America. I love this country, and I haven't seen it expressed as well anywhere in the last 10 years. And I've done a little traveling as an independent journalist. I haven't seen it expressed in a genuine manner the way I've seen it expressed here in Sandpoint over the last week. And I'm happy to be here and very appreciative of you folks. So that's enough for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Renata, do we ever connect with John?
John, would you like to try one more time to provide public comment?
All right, looks like that's not going to work. So John, if you wanted to send an email, we could get the information out to council.
Sorry about that. Yes, were you talking to me about my announcement, or?
Not quite yet, Renata, but
Sorry, I was multitasking.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there really soon. So we'll move on to announcements. Any member of the council have an announcement tonight? Kiki?
I just had a couple things. One, I wanted the rest of council to know that I attended a meeting with Ignite and the Coeur d'Alene Rotary Club on discussing the development of the Sherman Park project. And the city's drafting an agreement that will kind of outline who's doing what between those parties. They're hoping to have all the improvements finished in 2021 and in time for the Rotary Centennial Celebration at the beginning of 2022. And I also wanted to congratulate the Red Hot Mamas, who were invited to be in the virtual presidential inaugural parade. And I was lucky to be able to drop everything I was doing and help them put together a production and a facility, and a bunch of community members stepped up to help them do that. So we'll be able to see them on a bunch of national television shows representing Coeur d'Alene well, like they always do.
Now, were you a performer as well as a
No,
producer?
I'm the behind the scenes guy.
So you're just the
Yeah.
producer?
Yeah, I just boss them all around.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other, now, Woody?
Just a quick, weren't you a Red Hot Mama one time?
One of the originals, you bet.
I seem to remember you prancing.
I was still behind the scenes. I coordinated the first inaugural trip and got 90 ladies from here to Washington, D.C. So once that was done, I didn't figure it would get any bigger than that. So
I have a quick announcement. The mayor walked 100 miles, earned $1,000, and he just gave me a check for Lake City Senior Center. I want to appreciate that. I hope the 100 miles was worth it. Or what was it, 200 miles?
It's actually, it was a lot, it was probably closer to 300 miles. Yeah, but so it's a challenge through the Blue Cross Foundation that they do to all the mayors in the state of Idaho. And if you walk a certain number of miles, then you get $1,000 to go towards a charity of your choice that This year it either went to some type of youth activity or to an organization that was affected by the pandemic. And I felt the Lake City Senior Center has been impacted by the pandemic, so that would be a good source of.
But we appreciate it. I want to know the board and the staff and all the old folks, you know? Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so Renata, you have an announcement.
Yes, as you all know, Amy Ferguson has retired, and I wanted to introduce you to Sherry Batcher, I don't even know, I'm gonna mouth. Batcher. And many of you haven't had a chance to stop by City Hall to see her, but this is her smiling masked face, and you will see her in the admin office. Feel free to stop by and say hello and swap stories. And she's doing a great job. Just thought I'd give her a nice, easy council meeting to get through tonight.
Well, welcome, Sherry. It's great to have you here. And then Troy was going to give us, during this announcement period, an update on the windstorm and our city's reaction, what we've done and what we're going to continue to do in regards to the windstorm damage that we've had in the city, unfortunately.
Yes, Mayor and Council, thank you. The Wednesday, the 13th of January, we won't quickly forget, as that windstorm came in an epic way. When is it? It's been over like 100 years that we haven't had snow and frost in the ground, and we had multiple inches of rain before that. We'd like to thank our community for helping members of the community. They've also reported outages. They've also helped us many different ways and many different times. So a couple of quick updates. I would say about 98% of all your city streets are passable at this point. There's a couple of areas that have a little bit of work to do, none of which have power lines in them, but they have other utilities that need to be cleaned up. We are working to get rid of those large trees and branches that are still in the city's roads, and we moved them out of the way in order to get the streets passable, and we're working back through our community to clean those up. We had about 8 trees go down in City Park. Those are being worked on as we speak. Cemetery took a number of trees, unfortunately came down, and that's probably our most unsafe area, so we are locking the gates there until we get those cleaned up. And we had probably 25 trees on Tubbs Hill go down. Those will be worked on as time allows. The dike in Rosenberry has a huge amount of distress down there. We are working to get those secured down and prepare that levee for high water. That is probably our number one focus as we work with North Idaho College, one of our partners down there on that levee system. Building-wise, the city did pretty well. We had some damage to Fire Station 1, and we have a insurance adjuster coming out this week. Staff is working to prepare a list of what the adjuster can look at. Had a little bit of damage at one of the maintenance shops, but overall, probably the garage down at the Jewett House sustained the most damage, and so the adjuster will be looking at that as well. We have hauled approximately 100 loads, and these are loads in dump trucks. We have staged the debris out at our Atlas waterfront project. Fortunate to have that. We partnered with Kootenai County. They wanted us out of their transfer station because everything's going across the scales. We had an emergency meeting with them and the new director out there, and that is the way to look at that. The county has said that as we go forward, we can bring the grinder out there and they will take care of that debris. So that has been a great partnership. I can't thank the team enough. We have water employees that are cutting up trees. We have parks employees cutting up trees. We have recreational people that are cutting up trees. Fire department has stepped up. Your police and fire responded and have a couple of phenomenal saves helping people that had trees down on their homes last Wednesday morning. The loss of life is always a tragedy, and it's minimized with a storm of this proportion. I think your team has performed brilliantly, and I couldn't be any more proud of the way they've responded. We actually are slowing down and cutting up trees. Now, it'll take us a few weeks to get it all cleaned up, Mr. Mayor and council members. However, we are hearing people. We've got our urban forester working as many hours in a day as we can as he checks out trees that are possibly compromised. So the community has responded as we would anticipate. We have a few traffic signals that have been agitated. A couple of them took trees, and we have put them back together as best as one can. I shared a picture with you of what a tree coming down on top of a fire hydrant looks like. It pounded it down into the ground, and there was about 3 inches above ground at the end of that. That obviously broke a water line below it. Thankfully, that has been resolved, but now we're cleaning up a significant mess in our community. I'd stand for any questions, sir.
Council have any questions for Troy? Christie.
Mr. Mayor, I would just say, while this was happening, Troy did some great reports to us, I really appreciate that, keeping us in the loop on what was happening. And it was an incredible day and night. And so I'm glad that we're able to manage it with our city crews. If the college and the city can work together, even better. I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. So thank you to everyone for working so hard.
All right, thank you, Troy. I had just one piece of business to appoint Jim Windish to the library board.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to approve consent calendar as presented, including Resolution 21004.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any further discussion? Woody?
I was hoping I could ask a question about the COVID policy for the employees. If you don't mind, a quickie. So I read all this and I learned a lot. I had one question. If somebody refuses the shot and they're an employee, does it change anything for them?
So the vaccination
Vaccination.
process is not in the policy, and we've had conversations around that, but the city at this time won't be mandating vaccinations.
Okay, that's all I was interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Any other questions, discussion? Roll call, please. Renata?
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin,
Yeah.
English,
Aye.
Wood,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
Motion carried. We'll move on to other business. We have Council Bill number 21-1001, approval of amendments to the municipal code, Title 16 and 17, to revise the definition, to clarify the appeals process, and to make technical changes for consistency and clarification. Welcome, Hillary.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh.
something's wrong with the speaker. I'm not, maybe you guys are hearing, but it sounds like the sound isn't coming through clearly.
It's not.
And it's very difficult. It's like it's not, the microphone isn't working properly.
This,
Yeah.
This
Does
one
anyone
isn't.
else hear that, or is it just
The
I'm
microphone,
underwater?
the speaker's not on in the room.
Would you like me to overproject?
Or I'll be going, what?
Okay.
We lost a reverb piece of equipment on the power
Is it?
surge, knocked out this,
Oh,
and I think he's trying to compensate it with the speakers in the ceiling from what he told me. So, yeah.
so if that's as good as it gets, then that's as good as it gets.
It's a tool that got fried or something.
For tonight, yeah.
well, go ahead, Hillary, while
Okay,
we're
well,
working
we'll
on
go
that.
ahead and we'll attempt it, and I can adjust if needed. Is that too much? Okay. Great. So before you this evening are some proposed housekeeping amendments to Title 16, which is a subdivision code, Title 17, which is a zoning code, and commercial design guidelines. So I'll just kind of walk through quickly what these are, and then if there's questions, I'm happy to go into more detail on each of the items. But for Title 16, it's just simple change related to the appeal timing for notice of decision and having that be mailed out rather than published. And so what we did is we made some amendments about a year ago, and we didn't catch every single reference in the subdivision code or in the zoning code related to when a decision is made, how that would be done in terms of notifying the community and or the applicant. And so what we're having it do now, it's based on the date of the mailing to the applicant rather than the date of publication. So all the language references will be consistent in subdivision code as well as the zoning code. And so that's important for appeal timing.
Mr. Mayor, do we ask questions as we go?
Yes, yeah, go ahead, Council, as you have questions through the presentation.
So, Hillary, I guess if you could explain, I'm not sure why we would change that, because we don't know when some people get their mail.
So we've already changed it in the majority of the code, and as I mentioned, there was just a few sections that hadn't been changed. So
Okay.
it's when we send the mail, the letter that notifies the applicant of the decision is when the appeal happens. And so someone could call us and say, but it's generally 2 days after the planning commission hearing would be when that letter would go out. And so it's based on that. So that's when you, kind of the clock starts,
Wouldn't
rather
that,
than date of publication.
wouldn't that be just a little bit risky, though, if for some reason they didn't get their mail? And so the publication is something you can kind of always rely on, and that's the date.
Well, we worked through it with legal. I don't know if Randy wants to speak to that, but that was something that we determined was appropriate to make the change throughout the code in the 2 sections as noted.
A publication is not required under the Local Land Use Planning Act. And publication, not everybody gets the paper either, but publication can get quite expensive if every decision has to be published.
So we're not really doing publication, is what you're telling me?
Correct. Under the amended code, we're not publishing decisions, we're mailing them to the applicant. And so that is what the LLUPA requires.
Okay.
So what is the time frame
So it's 10 days after
after
the letter
it
goes
gets
out.
mailed?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Dan?
Mr. Mayor, so you're changing it so that it says that the appeal must be made when the letter goes out. What rules do you have that dictate when the letter should go out?
Well, we don't, but it's generally the week of the hearing. So it's,
So there are no
Yeah.
rules, which means there's no predictability. How's that fair to the public?
well, the public, we always invite them to ask us when the letter has gone out so they know when the appeal date starts. And we've always been very open and transparent with the public on the appeal process. There's no intent to hide it. It's just, as Randy mentioned, it does become very expensive. It's an extra step that has to go in, make sure that the press publishes it on X date and every single decision to be published. So we did make, as I mentioned, we've already made the majority of changes related to this in the code. So this is just a few stray
So how
ones.
does this benefit the public?
I think it's probably equally the same if somebody's already tracking a project, that they would know to find out when the appeal process
At the
starts.
meetings, when you have a meeting, like one I watched recently, and you
Right,
have a bunch of people who are against a project, and the
Right.
planning commission votes to approve the project, do you make an announcement at the meeting of the appeal process and explain to them what's necessary?
we do not. I mean, certainly something we could start doing, but it's something that we explain to the community in the process of when appeals can take
But
place.
not at the meeting when there's people who are actively opposing it. I mean, what's to prevent them from just thinking that that's it, that there's no appeal?
Well, often the chairman will make a statement about it. If there's a group of people that are unruly or upset with the decision, he can notify them about the appeal process and we clarify, but it's not something that we do routinely at every meeting. I mean, council doesn't either, right, at
Well, you
council
don't,
meetings.
the appeal from us is to a judge, but
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I'd feel a lot better if we were informing the public of appeal processes that were available to the public that are already in our code.
I think that just a brief reminder at every meeting that you may have a decision. Not every meeting you have something that would require appeal or you're making decisions, but I would imagine at most meetings you would. So maybe just a brief statement to maybe even start off the meeting that any decisions can be appealed to the city council at X date. So maybe that's just a standard line that the chairman reads at the start of every meeting.
Okay,
It's a
we
short
could
little
certainly do that if that would
message.
help with the process. Sure. Great. All right, so Title 17, so more of the changes are within this. So this is the zoning code. So the first one that you've heard some things about from community members, like David Lyons, is on changing the definition of the aggrieved or affected party. And so this is something where staff has looked at this section of the code for a while, and it's inconsistent with other sections of our code. We actually do, in other sections of the city's municipal code, reference more related to kind of what we're trying to propose tonight, which is based on the Local Land Use Planning Act, which is related to the affected party being based on the bona fide interest in property, right? Versus having anyone in the city who just happens to not like a person or a certain kind of project have the opportunity to appeal. This doesn't take away anyone's opportunity to come and speak in opposition to a project, but it's kind of the legal standing. So do you have legal standing if you don't like said person, or do you actually have legal standing if you live next to them and you're directly affected by the project? And so Local Land Use Planning Act specifically has this language that we're including in the proposed amendments before you tonight, which really helps guide the process. And so I think it's really important just to kind of bear in mind that, this is very important to set the precedence for the appeal process. And it also helps then when you take it to the next step. So if it goes to council, then you deny it, then it kind of sets the path forward for if someone wanted to take it through the you have to have the exhaustive remedy, take it through that process, and then you could start in the courts. And so I think that's one that's important for you to be aware of why we're proposing that change.
Thank you. Well, Hillary, I do understand the intent behind what you've brought forward, what the planning committee's brought forward. My opinion is intent is one thing, and then effect is a whole nother thing when you put it into city code or into policy. And so the effect could be rather chilling. Most people believe that if they're residents of the city of Coeur d'Alene, they do have interest in any projects coming forward. So just allowing anyone to appeal doesn't mean, if there's no merit, it's still going to go through the process with the city, and we would determine the merit of the appeal. So I don't particularly like that language. I don't want to eliminate anyone and us determining, well, you have an interest, so you can appeal it, but you don't. I don't think that would be appropriate for the council.
Go ahead, Hillary.
Okay, great. So that's.
and I have-
did you have it?
Go ahead, Dan.
Just to follow up on that, I think the concept of people having to have some kind of standing, I think makes sense, and I think there is very much a difference between people who are, however we define that within X amount of feet or something, that makes a real difference. And so that's one issue that I guess I'm, kind of struggling with, but generally, yeah, you have to have standing. I can't imagine somebody clear on the other side of town if we're saying just because they're a resident of Coeur d'Alene that they could do that, then, you've got to balance private property rights and things. But then a separate issue, and what I heard some of the conversation tonight, is on the height standard. Now that one, to me, that's very much a real issue. A lot of the, pain and suffering in the, stuff that prior city councils and this one has gone through have to do with, height and buildings, and now, of course, it's, we're balancing with density. But, so I guess I see that as a legitimate, at least, yellow blinking light that if it's going to have the effect of letting somebody, bypass that height ordinance, I've got a real concern with that. But again, there are two different issues, the aggrieved party standing versus the height issue.
Okay. On the height, I'll speak to that kind of on the next slide and go into some of the history on that. It actually dates back to 1982. So the height was very clearly noted in the code in 1982, and all subsequent amendments that 63 feet was appropriate for multifamily. So there's no new loophole here, but I'll go into that in a moment. So there's some clarifications to R34 in terms of making sure it's clear it's a special use permit only, not a zoning district, which is again clearly in the code all the way dating back to 1982. Talking about the increased height, clarifying that, and then just talking about kind of the transportation plan referring to KMPO's transportation plan, because the city doesn't have its own transportation master plan. And then we did clarify in there too that parks proximity is important. So that's one of the changes. The MH8, the mobile home 8 zoning, just clarifying the maximum height if someone were to build a single family residence in there. So that's just kind of just clarifying so that everybody understands you have the same 32 feet height in that zoning district as the other residential zoning. For C17, that site performance standards, wanted to make it clear that so you can go to 0 on your property line if you're in the commercial zoning district, but that you can't be impacting stormwater, snow, other things like that. So that was one of the things we wanted to clear up in there, that you'd still have to make sure that you might actually have to set it back a little bit to avoid those unintended consequences and issues. And then also allowing in C-17, if you have a horizontal mixed-use project, to allow the different uses to dictate what those setbacks would be, just to allow a little bit more flexibility. There's just some other changes throughout, kind of cleaning up language, changing titles just to make it consistent, adding or designee when it references the director, and then also clarifying there was some carryover from when there was a male planning director, so we just kind of gender neutralized all that throughout. We also wanted to clarify the ADU height, that you only get the increased height if it's over a garage. So if your accessory dwelling unit is not, it still is the 18 feet. So clarifying that. And then the buffer yard regulations, we had inconsistency in the zoning code and the commercial design standards. So we wanted to make sure that it was clear in both. And so we're saying if it's next to a residential use or zone, and that's in both. And then, excuse me, as I mentioned, clarifying the appeal process. So this slide is very blurry, I apologize for that, but this is from an ordinance dating back to 1982, and this was, the city basically went through the entire code and redid it to make it consistent with Idaho's Local Land Use Planning Act of 1975. And this language here, this sheet is R34, and it specifically says it's intended as a high-density residential district permitting 34 units per gross acre that the city has the option of granting through the special use permit procedure. That's exact same code that's in or same language that's in the code today. So we're not changing that. We were just trying to clarify it because we continue to have questions and appeals on that very language. Same thing with the height. This language from 1982 specifically says multiple family outside of 2 blocks of the central business district, 62.5 feet. Very clear. It actually used to have no height limitation if it was within two blocks of the central business district. That was since changed in 2006. So just wanted to assure you that staff is not trying to give any loopholes, and that the city council in 1982 said we want it as a special use permit and we want to allow the increased height. So thought that was important to clarify. Yep, go ahead.
Excuse me, Hillary, so as you're clarifying that, when it says the city, I think one of the points that's confusing for me is, did the city mean the city council or the city's planning commission
Planning
can
commission
approve?
is how the code's always been for special use permits. So
Okay, so it's
give the
always been the
authority.
planning commission who
Correct.
approves those. It's not been the city as in the city council.
correct, yeah. And then the last thing is just, as I mentioned, just making sure there's consistency between commercial design guidelines and the zoning code in terms of the design standards for the parking lot screening if it's adjacent to a residential district or use. So the decision point and recommendation before you this evening is to approve the housekeeping amendments to the Title 16, Title 17, and the commercial design guidelines as presented this evening. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Further questions? Woody?
So just go back to this appeal thing. Is there any examples that you could tell us or use to show us why it needs to be changed, right? I mean, have we been chasing a lot of appeals sort of frivolously, time and energy?
We've had a few over the past couple of years. I mean, not an excessive amount, but it raised the flag. So it kind of was like, are these really individuals that have true standing? Or is this just something where it's kind of just chasing it through the process? And it becomes very time consuming for staff
one.
and even to come before council if it seems like to be a frivolous appeal.
So name one.
But our code language,
You said you had a couple of examples, name one.
I don't know that I feel like that's appropriate to name one. I mean, I think the
Well, I
council
don't think it's
remembers some of
appropriate for
the.
the government to decide who should appeal, and that's what you're telling me you want, because you determined it was frivolous. We didn't. We went through the process, but now you're saying it's frivolous, so you just don't want them to happen anymore.
The staff is recommending that you use the Local Land Use Planning Act, which has been in place since 1975, and most cities and counties in the state use that language for how to determine who has standing to do an appeal.
But staff doesn't run the city, we do.
Correct? Correct? We're just making a recommendation.
At least I thought we did.
Hillary, if you could just clarify.
Sure.
On the appeal process, the rule today.
Right.
So what the rule today is,
Pretty much anyone that lives in the city. You don't, it could be within 300 feet, which is kind of typical for if you actually have legal standing and you're following kind of that bona fide interest. But ours says any person that happens to live in the city. as well can appeal. And so, like I said, it could be anybody that you either have a beef with someone, maybe your competitors, and so, someone's building the same project you want to, and so you're going to appeal it just because it somehow,
And that's never happened, or that happens all the time?
just sharing examples that it might happen.
So that's what it is now, and the proposal is to change it to X, just so I can clarify that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words in here.
Right, yes, so we're basically taking the language verbatim, minus a few little tweaks just to make it fit our code, but from the local land use planning act, just to clarify who has standing in which case, and what are the examples, so it's special, they say conditional use permit, we change it to special use.
Kiki?
So the language that you're using is the state land use code
Correct,
that says one having a bona fide interest in real property which may be adversely affected.
that's correct.
That's the exact
That's what we're
language
proposing,
that
yes.
you're proposing because that's what the state land use act uses.
Right, that's correct.
Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, Hillary, I do appreciate that we do try to find consistency with other agencies, but there are going to be times that we don't comport with what another agency may have for their code or their policies. And this is one where I guess I think you have to rely on your city council to determine the merit. And if anybody wants to appeal anything, we can listen and we'll determine the merit. And if it's frivolous, we won't support it. But I think it wouldn't be appreciated by the body of citizens to just say, we're now going to tell you whether you can actually even have standing to appeal. You must live near the area or whatever. And there are many projects that could have an impact on traffic, design standards that they think is awful for an area. So they need to have an avenue to have their voice, and we, this group, can decide whether it has merit. Does that seem fair?
Absolutely, staff's just make a recommendation and we'll defer to the council. If you like the current language, that's fine, we can keep it that way.
Dan?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to throw this out there and see what the rest of us think, but I would make a motion just to table this item. I think it's a little undercooked. I did not run for office to abdicate my responsibility to staff or unelected commissions. I think we should be the arbiters. We do represent the public directly. And while the housekeeping stuff seems legitimate and it should be done, I think the real purpose of this was to limit who can do the appeals, because it's obviously a pain to some staffers that they have to go through this process. I think it probably that Mr. Lyons himself was the cause of a lot of this, just to put this in here. I also don't like the fact that it's removing our ability to have the final say. I don't think anyone up here ran for office, went through that pain in the ass just so that they could say, well, we're just going to get rid of this responsibility that we have now and let another commission do it. You know, these meetings aren't running until 2 in the morning. We have time to handle it. We're getting paid to handle it. And until I'm convinced that there's really a flaw in the code, I don't think there's any reason we need to change this. It didn't come from council. Just for people watching, this was not something that we pushed. This is something that staff is pushing. I'd like to think that in the city we're in charge, and therefore I would make a motion just to table this entire item.
So Dan has a motion to table.
I'll second.
There's a second to that. Let's have discussion on, go ahead, and Christine.
Thank
then we
you.
can have
Just discussion, if I could, Mr. Mayor. Well, I agree with tabling it, but I do want to say that I understand the efforts by staff are, I think that they're putting their best efforts forward. And so I don't want it to come across as, disappointment in you, Hillary, whatsoever. We just happen maybe not to agree. That's where we're at.
So I may just, Kiki, I'll just make a quick point. I'm not a big fan of kicking something down the road and having to come back again. So I'll just throw it, if council thinks that there can be a tweak to get something done tonight, maybe that's something to have in the discussion, if we can tweak this. Otherwise, if obviously I agree with council if they want to move it down the road, but if something can be accomplished tonight, that would be great. If not, we can move on. I'll go to Amy and then back to Kiki.
I have a question for Hillary. Would it be appropriate, helpful to your department if we pull out the section of the appeal process with the definition of the affected or aggrieved party and looked at the other items mentioned and clean that up a bit, do the housekeeping part, table the appeal portion, and come back to that later.
That would be very helpful. Because currently we have some inconsistency even with that notice of publication and decision.
That was almost what I was going to suggest. So I think that when I was looking at the aggrieved party, it said, you know, the one who has a bona fide interest, and who's going to decide that who's going to decide a bona fide interest that's adversely affected. It's going to end up being a decision that it's going to have to be decided by council or somebody at commission, so I'm not comfortable with that piece of it either. So I was going to say if we can pull that piece out, and if we're assured that this R34 is not limiting it's not giving more power to the commission than the council, as you said, that it hasn't changed anything, then the housekeeping and the rest of the items seem to make sense. But the aggrieved party portion, if it was pulled out, I'd be amenable to that.
Dan?
Well, and I think I'm on the same page. Actually, I would, and I think Mr. Lyons had mentioned, you know, he would be fine if we kind of hit the pause button on, well, the aggrieved party. And then I guess I still have some questions about the R34 and the height, and even though, yes, it's been there for a long time, but I guess I'm still don't have a handle on exactly what can trigger an appeal from that and to who that appeal is. So I would be good if we put those off, but then let them keep going with, again, the bulk of it. Makes sense. They've done a lot of work, and again, that makes sense. So that's where I would be.
Mr. Mayor?
Dan?
If I could, so modify the motion. Hillary, do you think you've got enough feedback here that you could bring this back to us in maybe a modified form based on what you're hearing?
Yes, it certainly could, but it would be great if we could move some of it forward, because I think there's sections that clearly council has concerns with, and that could just be removed
My
this
concern
evening.
right now is making sausage during a meeting.
Okay.
Because there's things, and I don't disagree with anything that any other council person has said. But I think it would be easier if it was just presented to us, as opposed to us saying, okay, we're going to pull this item out, we're going to pull this item out, because then the problem we've gotten into in the past is that we can get something that's really messy, because we're not, I mean, we would be essentially ending the meeting and having a workshop. And I don't know, I mean, Mr. Mayor, maybe you can help me out. What would your thought be on, if you wanted to fulfill like the necessary parts of this, but leave out the parts that we object to?
It sounds like there's two issues. There's the appeal process, needs a little bit more work and a little bit more clarification, and then the R34 issue. Both of those need work. Could we pull those out, saying that we would like more discussion on those, table those two items, and approve the balance of what Hillary has presented?
As long as we go through it and make sure we haven't missed anything, that's my concern, is I don't want to, and I know you don't, Hillary doesn't want us to miss something too. That will cause another problem down the road.
Does council have any concern on any of the other items that?
No, and I suppose if we ever did, we could just have to put it on the agenda.
As I understand it, Title 17 is the first and second points on the list. Is that correct?
Title 16 and Title 17, yes. And it looks like the two sections that you have concerns with are sections 3 and 4 of the ordinance.
Well, you know, maybe, Dan, I get your point. Maybe it is best that is timing an issue, Hillary? Is this, if we came back to this at a meeting in the future, not a long ways down the road, but if we, and what I would like to see is in between now and the time we would bring it back, for council to give feedback to Hillary, so Hillary has some, you know, we don't come back again and we have maybe unanswered questions. Not that we can't ask them, but if we can get information to her, and then we can come back, rather than just trying to pick it all apart tonight.
So the one thing that's just the issue is just kind of publication versus doing the mailing to start the appeal process. So that's something where some of the code sections right now, we can send a mailing, and then other sections we have to publish, and so it's inconsistent, but it's
just
not urgent.
When we talk about mailing or publication, and maybe I'm making up a new rule here, I don't know why the appeal process time clock doesn't start from the time of the decision is made. So
Yeah,
you have X number
good
of days,
question.
X number of days, so you have 15 days from the date, or 10 days, or however many, and everyone knows that, so then it's not, there's no guesswork that, okay, the mailing goes out 2 days after the decision, or maybe it goes 3 days, or the publication doesn't occur 2 to 3 days. So I just don't know why it just doesn't say, and I don't want to make anything up,
Right.
right? But I don't know why it just doesn't say X number of days from the date of the decision.
Well, the Local Land Use Planning Act talks about the mailing of a notice to the applicant as being the start of the appeal process, if you will.
But are we bound to that, Randy?
No, I think council can, since it is the council's appeal process, you can put whatever date you would like.
I like the mayor's idea.
Does that have to be brought forward in like a new resolution or something to have it done? Because it seems like it would want to be consistent with all appeal processes for,
Right, so I'd have to bring back a bigger housekeeping ordinance because we'd want to change any of the references we'd already made, which is fine, it would be,
Maybe that's an issue, Hillary, that you can, when you bring it back next time, you can get together with staff and make a recommendation that you believe it should be X days from the date the decision is made. That's the start of the appeal clock, so to speak. So then there's no guesswork from anyone as to when the appeal process would start. Dan?
Well, that's a new additional wrinkle, although I think that makes sense. But I guess I'm still at the same point that I would like to see us vote on this, and I will vote against tabling the whole thing. And then, if it makes it, it makes it. Otherwise, we could have one where we pull those two out and maybe give direction to tie it to a different timeline for the appeal process. But I don't think we should just freeze everything tonight.
All right, so we have a motion to table this and bring it back at a future date, hopefully real soon. Renata, would you like to do a roll call on that?
Sure would.
Yeah, if you do a roll call, please.
Gookin?
Yes.
English?
No?
Wood?
Yes.
Evans?
No.
Miller?
yes.
McEvers?
Yes.
So motion carries, that we'll table that and bring it back and have council in the meantime. Do you think, Hillary, can we bring it back, is 2 weeks enough time, so the next council meeting, or would you like a little bit more time, so the
I
second
guess
week?
it would be helpful just to get some guidance between now and then. And we could certainly bring it back in 2 weeks, but I guess I need to understand better, in addition to when the appeal clock starts, what's the other, and if I'm doing that, then actually I probably need more than 2 weeks, because if I'm gonna be looking at the other sections of Title 16 and 17 for that. But I need some clarification on if you even wanna look at the appeal language and who has standing, or if you wanna leave it alone. And then if you wanna leave R34 alone, I mean, so I guess I still have some confusion on what I'm being asked to bring back in a couple weeks.
Mr. Mayor, from where I sit, I think the current code is fine. What I need to know is, why isn't it fine, and why does it need to be changed, with solid examples as opposed to hypotheticals?
Amy?
Well, I appreciate you referring to the Local Land Use Planning Act. My question is, does Association of Idaho Cities, would they be available to offer any guidance? Is this something they could help provide or shed some of their wisdom on? I'm not sure if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I was thinking about contacting Jerry Mason.
Yeah.
Just to see, I know he's retired.
He is retired. There's a new sheriff in town.
Okay.
Just a thought there.
And I would just like to stay with the current code we have now.
Just in listening to the conversation, I think that the appeal process, as it is right now, majority of the council feels that should stay the same. Unless someone has an objections to that the appeal would be to any city residents can bring an appeal. So no change to that, unless someone has any different ideas. So then the The main issue then is the R34 and when the time clock starts for the availability of appeal.
Okay.
And if we could, why don't we say the second meeting in February, so that would give you a month to work on that and then bring
Okay.
it back.
Very good.
So then, the second part of, on resolution number 21005, is there anything separate on that, or is that included in this?
Let's see, Renata, I don't have my agenda up here. How do you have, so the commercial,
We listed the commercial design guidelines separately as a
Okay.
resolution since it's not in the municipal code.
okay. So that one could certainly make that change. It's just a simple thing, so it's kind of referencing, as I mentioned before, if it's adjacent to a residential use or zone. So that at least helps, because then when I come back with the housekeeping, we can not have to do that one again.
Okay. Do you have any more information to present then on that, on this resolution 21005?
Nope, it's simply just, let me go back to that one slide. It's really just the change of this. All it says is, yep, related to residential district or use, so it's that simple.
Council questions of Hillary on that?
Got one, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Hillary, according to the piece of paper we have, so we have the site guideline that I assume is available on the website or that's passed out. And I see the only real change here is it just says or residential use. That's all
Correct.
we're really doing.
That's
Okay.
all you're doing, yes.
All right.
Amy?
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 21-005.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Renata.
English,
Yes.
Wood,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin.
Yep.
Motion carries.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to recess to February 1st at 5:30, Library Community Room, for a workshop regarding Envision Coeur d'Alene Comprehensive Plan Update.
Second?
Motion and a second to recess. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are in a recess till February 1st. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.